Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. My name is Shogun. Joining me today again is my good friend and expert in the occult and magical sciences, Drew. And this is going to be the launch of a special new series of seminars and workshops on the Roundtable. One of the topics we've covered a lot, going over 2 years, is magic, Western esotericism, hermeticism, and the occult, including things like alchemy, Kabbalah, gematria, and ceremonial magic. And so before we move on to those topics, I kind of want to get into like Eastern mysticism and Eastern spirituality in the near future. But before we move on, I want to make sure we've really, provided a comprehensive instruction on this. So hopefully you guys have listened to some of our past events on these subjects. If you go to the RT Podcast Series channel, you're going to find a lot of great podcasts on these subjects. And I'm going to just start out by posting these in general chat right now. So whenever you can, please listen to these. They're going to help you a lot. And also, please take a look at the Magic text channel, because Mr. Drew has provided a lot of resources there that we're going to be referring to in this seminar series. So ideally, if you guys want to be, on the ball, listen to some of these podcasts and read some of the text in that Magic channel. So today we're going to do episode 1 in Magic in Theory and Practice. Before we get started, please make sure you've joined the Roundtable Discord server. We record this podcast every day, usually at 9 p.m. Central, as well as other times. You can find our upcoming events in the announcements channel and our hundreds of great past events, special interviews and debates and so forth in the RT Podcast channel. That being said, welcome, my friend Drew. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm really shocked to see the crowd come out, but it makes me just happy to see people interested into the subject. I didn't think there was as much interest as there is. So that's pleasantly surprising. I'm really happy to be here with you, and I'm ready to get started whenever you are.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, and this is in the history of the Roundtable, magic, the occult, and Western Hermeticism has always been a major part of what we talk about. It's like a big, mix, component spice in the mix, so to speak. And I think there's a remarkable amount of knowledge in the server. There's people who are very deep into this stuff, and you're a good example of that, someone who's way more initiated into this than the average person. The average person doesn't know anything about this. But on the Roundtable, we got people like you who are actually fairly advanced. So before we get started, I think you identified your own rank or grade as Philosophus. Is that correct?
Right, that's correct. Yeah, that's what people have told me. I said I was a Neophyte for a very long time, and eventually a couple of people stopped me and they're like, well, let's think about this really. Where have you advanced? And they've kind of given me the title of Philosophus, and since then I've been saying it, so I hope I live up to it.
Right. So to clarify that, within the Western esoteric tradition, there's a traditional system of grades or ranks. And just like in the Roundtable, you go page, squire, paladin, kingsman, knight, knight of the Roundtable, knight commander. In magic, there's a series of ranks. And in reality, it takes a lot longer than one night to go from one rank to the next. It might take years. But nevertheless, for the interest of sort of introducing people to this concept, we're going to kind of label these episodes thematically based on ranks. So tonight, the rank is that of the Neophyte. So the pretense or pretension of this is that if you carry out this seminar in good faith and you, participate in the workshop, you would rise to the rank of a neophyte. So the dictionary defines the neophyte, Oxford Languages, a person who is new to a subject, skill, or belief, a new convert to a religion, or a novice in a religious order, or a newly ordained priest. So in other words, what neophyte represents is you're just beginning, you're starting out, you're new to something. And that's exactly where we hope that you guys all are in this podcast. You're new to this concept of magic. Now, some of you, like Astramia, she's a witch, she's experienced in this. Other people like Hermes have studied this before. So you all might have more or less knowledge, but at least if you follow along with this podcast, even if you knew more in the beginning, you can still confidently say you're a neophyte, which just means beginner. And then hopefully tomorrow's podcast will go to the rank of acolyte. And ultimately, we want to get to the rank of Adept. And an Adept is someone who is skillful, like trained and competent in a certain area. So our goal here is through this series of workshops to take you from a neophyte who is a beginner, maybe never even heard of this or ever took it seriously before, through to an acolyte, and we'll talk about what that means next time, and all the way to an adept, where you can say you're actually pretty competent and confident in magic. So I want to actually let Drew do most of the talking because he is more knowledgeable about this than me. He's more in this than I am. But I'm actually going to start the introduction. And my goal is just going to be to situate your understanding of what we're talking about, so that you can understand why you should actually take it seriously and why we're not talking about Harry Potter type shit here. That's just nonsense, because a lot of people's understanding is, well, magic is impossible. Magic is Harry Potter. It's not real. And anybody who believes in it is just believing in something silly and fake. I want to show you through what I'm about to say why that is a misunderstanding, a common misunderstanding, but a misunderstanding nonetheless. And hopefully, if you hear me out, you'll understand why you might actually want to take this series of workshops pretty seriously, and why it's not actually going to contradict any of your laws of logic, common sense, science, or anything else. And as always, I'll be smoking and drinking throughout the podcast, so please bear with me. But I'm nevertheless going to try to give you the best information that I can. So this podcast series is going to cover not only magic, but all the major components of the Western esoteric tradition. So that's going to include ceremonial magic and Western magic, including various forms like chaos magic, as well as alchemy to some extent, astronomy, or rather astrology to some extent, tarot cards to some extent, but especially Kabbalah and Gematria, which is Hebrew numerology to a large extent, but all of that secondary to magic. So basically, we're going to talk about magic, and those other components are going to come up as part of that bigger subject. So, what is magic? That's the real question. Please give me a second to hit my vape pen.
Well said so far, my friend.
Thank you. So magic is defined by Aleister Crowley, who is one of the most, if not the most, influential occultists of the 20th century, of living times. He gave a very good definition of magic. He said, magic is the art and science of causing change in accordance with the will. So when we as conscious beings form a plan for what we want to achieve, that's called teleology. So a telos is a goal, and teleology, or a teleological goal, is a goal-directed goal. It's like a mission that you have. So whenever you apply an art and science to achieve your goal, you are engaging in magic, whether you know it or not. So if you want to get a particular job, and you write a resume, and then you submit that resume, and then you get that call back, and then you do that interview, and in the end you get that job, congratulations, you just completed some magic. You had a goal, you did what you had to do, you exerted your arts and sciences, your skills, your intelligence, your ability, your willpower, your charisma, your faith, your belief, and all the other attributes you had, both, physical and metaphysical, and you ultimately achieved your goal. Then you completed some magic. And if you said, shit, I weigh 160, I'd like to weigh 180, and you did a bunch of push-ups, and you took a bunch of protein, and you made it 180, and you were big and muscular, whatever, then that was magic also. And if you wanted to find a girlfriend, and you went on Tinder, and you had a nice date, and you hooked up with someone, and they ended up being your girlfriend, you completed magic. So you don't need to be lighting candles and chanting spells and drawing pentagrams on the floor to be doing magic. You can, and probably are, doing magic unconsciously without even realizing you're doing it. When you wake up and say, shit, my apartment is messy, I need to clean my apartment, and then you clean it and it's clean, you did some magic, because that is the art and science of causing change in accordance with the will. So when the change that you complete is the same as the change that you willed to complete, in other words, when your idea of the future came first and you actually actualized that future later, and the actualized future matched the one that you intended, then you did magic. So Conor McGregor, when he won the 2-division champion in the UFC, He said, I visualized this so many times that when it finally happened, all I experienced was deja vu. All I experienced was seeing it again. It wasn't even happening for the first time. I'd seen it so many times. That's magic, right? He willed it, then it came true. That's magic. And that's what we're going to get into when we get to the chaos magic portion of this workshop. We're going to actually teach you the formula and the technique by which you can set your intention, empower your intention, charge your intention, and complete your intention through psychic, magical, spiritual techniques. So that's my first introduction to magic. The second introduction to magic I'd like to give you comes from a supposedly fictional universe called Mage the Ascension. And Mage the Ascension is a role-playing game created by a company called World of Darkness. So in principle, it's like a form of Dungeons and Dragons. It's not real. But if you actually know this stuff and you actually read it, you'll realize, okay, no, they took the real reality and they represented it as a game to make it easier to digest. But this is actually the truth. So I'm going to present you, unironically, a role-playing game and tell you that this is how the world actually works. And then I'll defend that. So please give me a second. All right. So in the game Mage the Ascension, it says, the characters portrayed in the game are referred to as mages and are capable of feats of magic. Magic in Mage is subjective rather than objective, as it incorporates a diverse range of ideas and mystical practices, as well as science and religion. A mage's ability to change reality based on what they believe, rather than an objective or static system of magic. In that regard, most, but not all mages, do not resemble typical fantasy wizards. Okay, so premise. In Mage the Ascension, players play the role of mages, people who discover that they have the ability to shape reality through magic. The process of this discovery is what mages call awakening. Awakening is a mysterious, often traumatic experience wherein a person's avatar, a kind of tutelary consciousness or daemon, wakes up within the mage, granting them the ability to do magic. Once awakened, mages can learn to effect changes to reality via will, beliefs, and specific magical techniques. But the difference of how they do this forms the central conflict of the game. There are four factions: the traditions, the technocracy, the Neophyte, and the Marauders, all of whom struggle against one another on all levels of reality, from the digital world to the spirit world to the physical world, and even in the world of ideas, to covertly persuade the unawakened masses that their beliefs, also called paradigms, are best. This age-old struggle is called the Ascension War, wherein the four factions vie for control of reality itself. The technocracy is a worldwide conspiracy of hyper-rational mages whose paradigm is considered to dominate reality with their belief that science is the ultimate way to advance humanity. They fight for the extinction of magic and the supernatural and the belief in magic and consider their own will-working awakened science. They have more or less successfully convinced the unawakened masses, otherwise known as sleepers, that magic and the supernatural do not exist and never did. They believe in a safe, predictable, static world where everything is understood and controlled and nothing is left to chance. They also wish to guide this world from the shadows. The Marauders, on the other hand, are pure change. They are mages who have been driven insane by their mind-bending powers and are consumed by their own individual beliefs. Chaotic and disorganized, the Marauders pursue their own warped agendas to the exclusion of all else. The Neophyte are forces of corruption and destruction. They are mages who have sold their souls to demonic forces or Lovecraftian horrors in exchange for power in this life. They are committed to the particular agendas of their individual patrons, but all of them pursue the total destruction of everything. The traditions, which are the default character faction, are a diverse confederacy of wizards, sorcerer, mystics, and mystic-minded technologists and scientists who have banded together to resist the technocracy's control of reality. Most mages and factions within the game are working towards an occult goal known as ascension. The nature of ascension is open to interpretation, and each faction and sub-faction of the game differs on their views of what ascension is. It may involve a single mage becoming a paragon of their beliefs, or transcending them entirely. It could also involve a mass awakening of the unawakened, known as sleepers, or at least mass empowerment through the adoption of a particular practice or belief. So again, everything I just read to you right there was the description of what's supposed to be a fictional role-playing game. But in reality, everything I just read to you is a fairly accurate political map of what's actually happening in the world right now. And this is the world that we all live in. So most of us are sleepers. We are human beings who possess a soul, and we possess the capacity for magic. But because we've been brainwashed into not believing in these things, we are passively giving our magical power to a system of control called the technocracy. So they are actually using you as a normality generator. As long as you believe in normality, your inherent power for magic, instead of being used to cause change in accordance with your will, is being used to passively generate something called, well, I can't remember. It's like the mundanity or the consensus. So all the sleepers are actually still mages. The sleepers are mages, but because they're unawakened mages, their inherent magical power is actually being used to enforce a normality system. So things are mundane and predictable because most people believe things are mundane and predictable. So they provide something called the consensus, and whenever the mage attempts to change reality, he has to overcome the power of the consensus, which is the latent magical power of all the people who don't know what magic is and just think everything's explained by science and blah, blah, blah. Now, we need to briefly talk about the traditions. So if you're not one of the sleepers, the sheeple, the people who are asleep, you are one of the mages. And if you're one of the mages, assuming you're not an evil, child-abusing Satanist like an Effendi or a schizophrenic like the Marauders, you are one of the traditions. And the traditions represent all of the different systems of magic that exist in the modern world. So the verbena correspond to witches, Wiccans, people who do folk magic, root cutting, root binding, herbalism, candle magic, all of that stuff is the verbena. You have the dream speakers. These are shamans, ayahuasca shamans, DMT shamans, astral projectors, lucid dreamers. These are dream speakers. You have the Akashic Brotherhood. These are meditators, yogi practitioners, martial artists, people who practice mantras, mudras, and asanas. These are the Akashic Brotherhood. You have the Hermetic Order, or the Order of Hermes. These practice Kabbalah, alchemy, Western ceremonial magic, Goetia. This is the Order of Hermes. You have the virtual adepts. These are people who practice hacking and highly advanced internet technology as their system of magic. And you have the Sons of Ether. These are those who practice etheric science, Nikola Tesla science, and alternative systems of science, different plasma physics. That's the order of Sons of Ether. And the Celestial Chorus, which is what I identify as. These are the Abrahamic religious people who practice prayer, faith, and miracles within a monotheistic religious tradition. These are still mages, right? Even though they're religious in nature, they're still mages because they're still using their will and their belief system to cause changes in reality. They just think of the world in a certain way where they see themselves as part of a chorus singing a song of God's praise. In other words, we're all instruments of God's will, but we're still mages as well. And you can go into the other systems. The Euthanatos is a little bit weird, having to do with like sort of assassin cults and systems of the good death, like the Hashishim, which were the assassins, people who basically kill people for good reasons. Those are the Euthanatos. And the Children of Ecstasy are people who use drugs, sex, ecstatic traditions, MDMA, to access higher states of consciousness. And there may be others as well. So the reason that I'm saying all this is each of the traditions is a paradigm. And a paradigm is a way of thinking about the world. And in this worldview, the way you think about the world is actualized. So if you believe the world is a certain way, your belief gives force to that. And that's what the Bible says. It says if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. If you say, get up and throw yourself into the sea, a mountain will get up and throw itself into the sea. So faith is powerful, and the traditions represent the different ways that our faith is expressed. And magic has multiple techniques, and which technique we use depends on which tradition we follow. And in reality, we can follow more than one tradition at a time. So, what is magic? The art and science of causing change in accordance with the will. What are the traditions of magic? They are numerous, right? From the east to the west, from the Hindus to the Christians, from the Satanists to the believers. We're all doing magic. The only question is, are you going to remain a sleeper, right? Who has the ability to change reality through your God-given divine spark being made in God's image? Are you going to remain asleep and just be a blue pill force of normality and an NPC? Or are you going to wake up and pursue the goal of ascension, which is rising above this plane of reality to a higher plane of reality by achieving the goals set out for you by your tradition that will lead you through the gates of initiation to higher orders of power, higher orders of control, and higher orders of experience, which is called ascension. And that's why the game is called Mage the Ascension, because the ultimate goal of every mage is to ascend, because the current domain we're in is a test and it's a school. We're being taught and we're being tested. And once we learn the lesson and pass the test, we go to the next grade, and that's called ascension. But if you don't do that, you can actually fall down to lower grades, and that's something we don't want to do. So that's my introduction to it. What you believe is effective. When you're said you're made in God's image, it also refers to the way that God's will is actualized. We also have that power. The Bible makes that clear. Whatsoever you ask for in my name with faith, it shall be done, so that the Father can be glorified through the Son. What that means is, knock and the door shall be opened, ask and it shall be given. Who of you, if your child asks you for a loaf of bread, will give you a serpent? Who will give you a snake or a scorpion? God likewise will give you what you ask for. In other words, you're a mage. You can achieve what you say your mind to. And Jesus did many miracles and said also, greater things you shall do even than these. In other words, we can do greater acts even than Jesus through faith. Faith is belief. So what did the Hermetic teaching say? It said, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the will. Love is the law. Love under will. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. So on that note, I would like to hand the microphone to Mr. Drew and let him take it wherever he'd like from there.
Oh my lord, that I'm giving you an applause. That was a beautiful intro. Thank you so much. I think that game has painted a beautiful picture of the reality that all paths are true as long as there's a wholehearted intent to it. Surely, I think that's amazing. I'm blown away. That was awesome. I read a little bit about it, and hearing you go over it like that really solidified the game for me. I would enjoy playing it with you sometime. But aside from that, like where we're gonna go with ceremonial magic in this course is the basics first. As an initiate, I think it's clear, and like he said throughout that your will is everything. So everything you envision is gonna come into reality. We're gonna be using a book, and that's written by Damien Eccles throughout this, and I'm gonna give a little foresight on Damien Eccles before I move into using the examples and practices throughout it, just to give you, in case you don't pick up the book, but I hope you do. It's very enjoyable. But Damien Eccles is an individual that got caught up in a very messed up situation. He, along with two other kids, were convicted of supposedly killing 3 little boys in a ritualistic manner, and this is completely false. They all spent 20 years on death row, and Damien was one of these individuals and spent it in solitary confinement 10 of those years. They had later, been set free, and they had to take a deal because the county was not willing to take it on their shoulders and responsibility for their negligence. But there was DNA evidence that pointed to somebody else, and that's what got them out. While Damien was in there for 10 years, the system 20 years, he picked up these practices along the way, and they are what kept his sanity. They're what kept him whole as a person. And they transformed him into what I would say is a beautiful magus today. And the reason why I chose this book in particular is because he did all of this from a cell. He didn't use tools. He didn't, go out of his way. He just did it all with his will and all of his mind, and got through a terrible circumstance by means of will and magic. And I think there's just no better example. This is the individual that inspired me and made me realize, hey, this might work for me too. And also, he supplied us with a work that we can all follow along. And I posted the link to it in the podcast text. If you want to pick it up and read it, I would really appreciate it, and it'll help along the way. But without going too much further into that, I think it's time to get down into what we're going to be practicing today, and that is first thought reformation. So the beginning part of being an initiate into this is about understanding your will, and we've kind of gone over that here and solidified that, and I'm really happy with what Shogun shared because it truly solidified this as well. Our will is so important. Your thoughts become reality. As above, so below as above. Okay, and our mind is projecting reality to some extent. Everything we receive and how we transmutate that and give it back to the world is what is going to determine our future. You can apply this to any scenario. It is impossible not to be able to. It's a basic formula. Our reality depends on the way we think about it. And we can be the number one determining factor in whether it's a better reality tomorrow. So the first practice you have to start applying is thought reformation. When you're reforming a thought, you are taking a negative thought or feeling, and you're trying to find a positive spin on it. I'm going to use Damien's examples here because I thought they were really good. So there's a negative version and a positive version. I really hope I don't get sick. And the positive spin. I'm glad I'm healthy. Negative spin. I have to dig myself out of this hole. I just get farther and farther behind. It seems like it gets worse and worse. The positive. It's been hard, but I've made it through multiple challenges. I can face these obstacles and succeed, just as I have before. I know this sounds so incredibly basic, but ask yourself how much you actually do that on a regular basis. Because most of the time when things come into our life, we just emotionally react to them immediately. We impulsively engage with what we've been confronted with on a constant basis without taking it in truly and trying to transmute it and making it into something better. And once you start building this practice in circumstances throughout your day, I'll give an example. I've probably gave this example 100 times, but I think it really gets the point home. I work in customer service, particularly when people come to me and they're angry about something in particular. I work with them the best I can, and what I say inside of myself to help myself help them is that no matter what they're saying to me, is them truly saying, I am in pain, help me. And this kind of thought reformation, when you're in a tough circumstance with an individual, creates this line of empathy between you and them that you wouldn't believe how much of an impact it has until you encounter it. But you can take this into any circumstance. And this is a very basic practice. It's about keeping up with this. Remind yourself on a basis when you're confronted with something negative, reform it into something else. Make it better. Put a spin on it and face it head on. And with that determinism, your will is imposing onto reality. And not just that, but you're also accepting it and you're transmuting it and taking it within yourself and putting it out there into the world with a whole heart. And that's what's really important about this particular practice. And I want to move on to there's a couple examples here that you can refer to back later in the book if you'd like. And it's right under directing your attention. Below the examples, he goes into a description of each of those, but I'm going to skip those. I feel like I've done okay on that part. So there's 5 basic meditations we're going to be moving on to, because meditation is extremely important in this process, is because we've been talking about taking control of your will, and your mind is a muscle, your spirit is a muscle, everything about you is some form of a muscle. You can work through it, you can make it stronger in some way. And meditation is one of the key things in having full control over your will. And there's, I think, 7 or 6 here. And I'll let Shogun pick which one we do, but I'm just going to read off the examples here. There's the standing meditation. It's easier to do this meditation without your shoes or socks on. Find a quiet place to stand, relax your shoulders, and close your eyes. Feel the sensations involved with having your bare feet on the ground. What do you notice about that? Are there certain areas of your feet that are more in contact with the ground? Notice any differences in the pressure and temperature. If you don't notice much, feel free to rock forward on the balls of your feet and then back toward your heels. A little so that you can detect the changes in the different sensations. Note as many details as you can. So that's the first meditation. And then the second is walking meditation. These instructions are almost identical to the standing meditation, with the important exception of keeping your eyes open while you walk. You can do this alone or in a place with others where you won't be disturbed. If you do it by yourself, find a quiet room that you can walk back and forth in, somewhat slowly, but not exaggeratedly so. Feel the various sensations of your feet as they rise and fall in your normal way of walking. If this isn't too difficult for you, also turn your attention to what your legs feel like as you move around the room. Pay attention to the sensations in your ankles, your calves, your knees, and your thighs. See how detailed you can make your attention and note what comes up. And then there's the third one, listening meditation. To do this meditation, find a place to sit that offers various sounds outside in a park, in a restaurant, or in an airport while you're waiting to board your flight. You don't have to close your eyes for this practice, although some people find that it helps them focus. Listen to the sounds happening all around you. Take a few moments to distinguish them and pay attention to the contrast. So, essentially that's very basic. You would just meditate on listening. You would be more in tune with your environments and listen. And the fourth one is a looking meditation. It also helps to be outside for this one, although you can do it in a large room just as well. Pick something relatively close to you, a cup on the other side of the table from you, or maybe a nearby tree in the park. Check out all of the visual details you can find, color, shape, patterns, shadings, or anything else you can see. Spend a couple of minutes on this object, and then turn your attention to something farther away, something yards away from you. Pay attention to this object in the same way, noting all the different details, and after a couple minutes, turn your attention back to the original object you examined. See if you can note any new features that you didn't notice before. And then there's eating meditation, this last one, so bear with me. This particular practice doesn't take too much more than slowing down and paying attention to the process of eating your next meal. You might want to do this alone and when you're not in a particular hurry to get to do something else. For a lot of us, eating has become somewhat mechanical and speedy, and this meditation will help you appreciate the complex and delightful process of consuming your food. Just slow down. Really focus on all the textures and the tastes you come across. And feel what it's like to swallow your food. The same meditation works with drinking juice, soda, or a glass of wine, but I don't recommend trying it with more than a single glass of your favorite alcoholic drink. It's hard to pay attention relatively quickly. So the central point across all of these things is you're trying to refine your attention on things you just don't normally pay attention to. And you would be on a healthy regimen of doing this. Of course, tonight is just the initiation, of course. So it's up to you whether you want to take on that responsibility. Within the initiation, and this isn't the last practice, I believe there's one more, is the energy phase. And it kind of combines both of these practices in some way. But again, like you're refining your attention, you're honing in your will, and through the things you don't observe on a normal basis, having more attention about them will give you a profound truth to where you really are in life. And it's essentially grounding is what it's really doing to you. It's bringing you into Malkuth, and we'll get later into that down the road, which would be the tree of life and whatnot. But we'll get into that later. But essentially, that's where we are now. We are on Earth, and our ego, and it's about grounding that and becoming one with it and having control over it to some extent. And the key to that is through observing the things you haven't observed on a normal basis and honing your attention directly to it and making a change in that subtlety and seeing how that ripples out throughout your behavior in your life on a day-to-day basis, how much of an impact it takes. Before I get into the energy phase, I'm going to mention a Book of Shadows real quick and give a very brief description of that. There's kind of like some mystery around it. No, it's a journal, and it's that you just keep up with your practices in it, essentially, or spells that you use, and you take notes. It's essentially a notebook for a magus, to put as simply as possible. I do recommend keeping that and keeping it very close to you and having it segmented and very organized between these three practices in itself for 9 months is what's traditionally done. But today I just ask you to come up with just one situation and write it down now or later if it comes up, but please try to, and it'll help along the way. But try to do a simple thought for your formation. Think of a negative thing today and write that down and then write a spin on it and then put it away. You know what I mean? And just let it go and move on. And then for the basic meditations, I'm going to let Shogun pick which one we do today, or we can skip this practice and keep going to the energy phase. I feel like it's a little bit more fun, and we might be all able to do this one. I think everyone here understands the basics so far because it is very basic, and a lot of mysticism shrouds magic, but it can be quite mundane to the initiate phase. So Shogun, what would you like to do? Would you like to move on to the energy phase and use that practice as a collective, or would you like to pick one of these 5 basic meditations and, well, except for the eating one, because then we'd have to cook something.
I highly encourage you to decide. At this point, I think you know what's best, so whatever you want to do is what I also support.
Okay. Well, we'll just move on to the energy phase so we can get to the sigil. I don't want to keep people hanging up too much on this part. I just recommend when you go to pick up the book, you try these practices out when you go back through it. Because we are going to be moving at a fast pace. And like I said, like this first part that we're doing tonight takes 9 months in an initiation. But we're going to do the energy phase next. We're just going to do that because it's fun. I like it. So the idea here is that you've probably, by this point, you've been doing the visualizations, the meditations, and thought reformation for about a week or a couple weeks by this point, and you're you've really gotten control over your mind to some extent. And you will notice within a couple weeks if you do practice it. It's just like a dream journal. You write your dreams down, you happen to remember more dreams. It's just the way our brain works. It's amazing. But so the idea here is you're combining all these things into a practice, like a ritual where you use your body and your mind all at the same time to do magic. In the energy phase, it's really fun. So I want everyone to rub their palms together. Do this vigorously. The way people rub their hands together when it's cold outside. Fairly soon, 20 seconds or so, you'll feel your hands growing warm. The heat comes from the friction you created, of course. As anyone who's had to sit through elementary school science knows, heat is energy. In fact, everything on the material plane contains heat energy. It separates your hands. Step 3, separate your hands about 6 inches apart. And your eyes are supposed to be closed this whole time. I should mention that. And I want you to feel the heat on your hands and feel the cold air between them. If at any time during the practice you need to generate more heat with your hands, return to step 1 and just keep doing it. And as you're feeling this heat in your eyes, in your mind, you'll imagine it turning into a ball, whether it be water, fire, whatever you want, doesn't matter. But you want to imagine it manifesting into a ball. This energy you're feeling from your senses in your hands. Experiment with this sensation. Move your hands a little farther apart, a little closer together, and what that's like. Try to mold the energy into different shapes. Hold it in your hands as if you were to gently squeezing a water balloon that you're trying very hard not to burst. What happens when you add that visualization to the exercise? So it might be a little hard because you might feel a little goofy doing it at first, I promise. But if you've been in like a meditative state for about a couple of weeks and you've been doing this, it's quite fun, honestly, because like you'll start to notice it, and your mind and the energy you're producing in reality kind of intertwine between reality and the astral, and so you're feeling this relationship develop further with reality and your mind. Now, this might seem like a very basic practice, but it does get very fruitful after some time. It's really enjoyable. The phase 2 is I'm going to read the whole thing. This might help, actually. But it's not that long. Don't worry. If you spent adequate time on phase 1, by now you're more proficient at raising energy and shaping it between your palms. Now you're going to learn basics of directing energy and utilizing it for all sorts of magical purposes. From charging objects to passing healing energy to other people. For our purposes here, you're going to place energy into a given item with a particular intention in mind. I talk a lot about talismans, objects charged with magical energy, later in part 5 of the book. So feel free to skip ahead and read more about them there if you'd like. If not, no need to. The exercise will do its job here. Right now, you're just trying your hands at practicing the basics of charging. So, actually, I'm gonna leave this step out because Shogun's actually going to go into the elements of this. I completely forgot. This is where I'm going to hand it off right after. I wanted to read one thing as a closing statement from Damien. I think it's really important. I don't have it on hand. I'm gonna pass it on to you, Shogun, and then I'll bring it up later as like a closing note because it'd be a good closer, honestly. So, I'm gonna hand it off to you, and if you'd like to introduce them to Sigil Magic, I think I've covered the basics, honestly. Like this is what you would do for 9 months.
100%. And I want to just reiterate something that Drew pointed out, which is that mental reframing is one of the most powerful and essential forms of magic. I personally deal with this, so I tend to fall into these situations where I'm like, oh shit, my situation is bad for this and that reason, and I'm fucked for this and that reason, and that's the way I'm defining my circumstance. But because we're all mages and our belief determines reality, if we start determining our reality and explaining why we believe that we're fucked, then we're really fucked, right? We're literally creating a situation where we're bound by the ways that we're interpreting our situation. So I'd really encourage you to look at Damien Eccles and what he says here, right? Oh, my situation gets worse and worse, and I just need to keep struggling harder and harder just to stay afloat. Sometimes it feels that way. But if you say that to yourself, that's your reality. Instead, you say, yeah, things are hard right now, but I've overcome harder things than this, and I'm going to overcome this as well. Either of these statements are quote unquote true, right? Either of these are accurate and true, but one of them is empowering and one of them is disempowering. So you're the one who makes the choice. Do you look at your situation in the empowering way, or do you look at your situation in the disempowering way? Either way, what you believe is going to come to pass. That's going to be the reality you live in. So you must learn to contextualize your own circumstance in an empowering rather than a disempowering way. You must also learn to meditate, to quiet your mind and calm your mind. And all of these skills are going to help you in magic. But for the workshop part of the session today, I want to talk about chaos magic. So chaos magic was developed by a guy named Austin Osman Spare. And basically what he was trying to do was make magic less unnecessarily complex and less unnecessarily elaborate. And the reason that that was necessary is because magic was taking place in a Western esoteric tradition in the form of things like Enochian magic, Goetia, or Western ceremonial magic. It was highly complex, highly ornate. You had to have these certain tools and invoke these certain archangels at certain times of day and facing in certain directions. And it was very complicated. And he said, why should it be so complicated when the mechanics are very simple? So if you break magic down to Austin Osman Spare's system, it becomes very simple. And therefore, it's a good starting point for magic. So I want to get into this now. So I'm going to talk about chaos magic. So first of all, what is chaos magic? Well, it's called paradigm piracy. So he believed that any way of believing about the world was valid. As long as you believed in it, that was going to essentially come true for you. And therefore, you could actually adopt different belief systems when they served your interests. So if you want to go into like a UFC fight, maybe you should adopt like a Nordic or Norse, like Viking system, because those guys were like warriors. And then you like invoke like, you know, Thor or Odin or something to get the strength you need for that fight. But if in another situation you want forgiveness, maybe you should turn to Jesus. And if you want, you know, enlightenment, maybe you should turn to Buddha. In other words, you can choose which of these worldviews you choose to work with as and when it serves your interests. And you can believe in all these different things when and if it helps you to do so. But in a broader sense, we're now going to talk about sigil magic. And this is where I'm going to turn on the video to try and explain this. So in order to create a magical effect, you need to break it down to three basic components. One, you need to have your intention, your will, right? Magic is the art and science of causing change in accordance with the will. So first and foremost, you need to know what it is that you will. Perhaps you will to make more money. Perhaps you will to find a girlfriend. Perhaps you will to sire children, or perhaps you will to get a new job. Perhaps you will to gain more muscle mass, or perhaps you will to lose some weight. There's many different things that you might will to do. The idea is you need to first set the intention. You need to know what it is that you want, and then you need to express that desire in a symbolic form, which is metaphorical or cryptographic, meaning encoded. So you want to encode your will in a visual symbol that at the same time reminds you of your will, but isn't so explicit as simply a written thing. So if you just wrote it down, that would be called an affirmation. So I could write down 10 times a day, I will gain 20 pounds of muscle mass. I will gain 20 pounds of muscle mass. I will gain 20 pounds of muscle mass. And I could write that down, and that would actually be a good form of magic called affirmation. Just write down your intention, say it out loud, write it down. As you believe, so shall you perceive. As you perceive, so shall you achieve. But what we're going to talk about now is actually taking that a step further. And so basically what you're going to want to do is, this is the workshop part of the session. So I'm going to ask all of you guys, get yourself a piece of paper and a pen right now. Please get yourself a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, a marker, whatever you want. But get yourself a pen and a writing instrument, okay? And I've already done a few as demonstrations, but I'm also going to do another one with you guys as well, so you can see. So get your pen, get your paper, and write down what you want. If you had godlike power, if you could achieve anything you wanted just by setting an intention, what is your highest intention? What is your deepest desire? What is your deepest dream? So now I'm on my mic. I'm going to flip it around so you can see my book. Okay. So here's an example. It says, I will draw closer to God. Okay. So there's my intention. Now, how am I actually going to do this? Well, I'm going to start by removing all the repeating letters. So I have the letter I, the letter W. This I is now repeating because I already have I here. There's no double letters. So I, W, I, L, second L, repeating. D, R, A, etc. So I'm removing the repeating letters, right? There's two O's, right? Two D's. So anytime there's more than one of the same letter, you're removing it, right? So you're going to only have one of each letter. Once you have all the letters remaining, you're going to form those into a sigil. Now, it might not make sense to you, and I'm not saying these are the most beautiful sigils. I just did these on the fly. But this sigil here is made of all the letters here. But I'm removing all of the repeating letters, and then I'm employing all of the remaining letters into the sigil to turn the written sentence into a graphic depiction. Now, I agree, that's an ugly-ass sigil. That is not a very beautiful sigil. But perhaps it helps you understand the concept. So here's another one. I will draw closer to God. Same thing, right? And I checked off all of the letters as I included them. And once I included them, I turned the statement, I will draw closer to God, into this image here. Now, this image here, visually, it doesn't say I will draw closer to God, but if I break it down, there's the I, right? There's the W, right? There's the A, there's the D, there's the C, right? In other words, sorry, my cat is, sorry, buddy. But it's all there, right? And I'll show you another one. It just says, I am strength, right? And you remove the letters, you end up with the sigil, right? And I'm going to show you how this is actually done. But fearless, right? It turns into that. And you can do it artistically any way that you want. So again, I'm going to ask you guys to get out your piece of paper right now. Write your intention, okay? So mine will be here, I am happy, okay? Because I want to be happy. So I set my intention that I am happy. I remove the double letters. So there's two P's, there's two A's. Everything else is only occurring once. So as often the case, it starts with I. So I put an I. That's the basis of the sigil. Next letter is going to be A. So I put the A like this. There's the A. Where's the M? There's the M. Now I have I-A-M is I-A-M. Here's happy. That's the H. The A is repeated. Here's the P at the top. And there is the Y. And then I'll draw it in a little circle. And now I have a sigil. And again, the more time you spend on that and the more, the better it's going to be. But what you're going to end up with is a visual representation, which is cryptographically encoded. So when you look at this, you can't see that it says, I am happy, but actually it does say, I am happy. You wrote it down, I am happy. And what you ended up with was this, or what I ended up with was this, right? So that's the same with all these, these other things, right? So what you want to do is take your intention, write it down, remove all the repeating letters, and then organize the letters into a sigil so that you end up with a visual representation of your intention. This is now the structure. This is the format, this coded shape of your intention. And so that is like the target, right? That is like locking like a missile target on something. And that is going to ensure that your will goes to the intended result that you had for it. But that's only half of it. The second part is to actually empower or charge that sigil so that it has the power. So let's say you had a sniper rifle and you had the perfect targeting coordinates, latitude and longitude, exactly where to point that gun. But there's no force. There's no gunpowder in the barrel. There's no force in the bullet. So when you shoot it, it's perfectly aimed, but there's no power. So the bullet just falls out in front of you. It was going in the right direction, but it only went 2 feet when it was supposed to go 100 feet. So the first part is making sure you have your coordinates correct. The time, the place, the target, the goal, the intention. That's what I just tried to show you how to do. Write it down verbally, remove the repeating letters, shape it into a sigil, which is a grammatical or graphical representation of the sentence in a visual form. That's like the targeting coordinates, right? The x-axis and the y-axis. Now you know what you're actually directing your intention into. But how are you going to actually charge it, right? How are you actually going to put the force into the sigil to manifest it? This is where it gets actually kind of complicated. And to be perfectly honest, this is where it gets a little bit weird. But nevertheless, if you want to charge a sigil, you have to put energy in, right? Fuel, gas. What does that represent spiritually? So one option would be create your sigil in the way that I just showed you and meditate on it, right? Look at it visually, focus your eyes on it, breathe in, breathe out, and focus your eyes on it the same way that you would focus your mind on a candle flame or on a mantra if you were meditating. So if you're meditating, you might just say, Om, and you would focus all your intention on that Om, or you would focus all your intention on your breathing in or your breathing out. Or you'd focus all your intention on the candle flame and you'd light a candle and you just gaze at that candle flame and stare at it and put all your attention on it. You could do that with your sigil, and that would be one way to charge it. It's just to focus your intention on it, meditate on it, look on it, focus your mind on it. Maybe you could make a spell out of it, right? Make a verbal express spell out of the words with the taking out the repeating letters, and you can make a mantra out of it. That would be the basics. But in reality, a lot of people charge these sigils in a little bit more intense way. One of them is called blood magic, and I do not actually recommend this. I don't think you should do this. But there's a huge movement online called blood over intent. And so what they do is they take their intent and then they cut themselves and they put their own blood over their intent. And it's called blood over intent. That's called blood magic. Because the Bible says in the blood is the life. There's like a supernatural magical power in blood, and that's why you get sacrifice, human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, blood sacrifice. Blood has power. You put blood over your intent. That's one way to charge it, but that's blood magic. It's dangerous. I don't recommend it, and I don't suggest that you do that. But I pointed out to indicate how this works. Another very common thing is called sex magic. People will essentially masturbate onto the gifts, and they'll actually ejaculate onto the sigil. I said gift, but I meant sigil. So people will actually essentially jerk off, either male or female, while staring at their sigil that they created representing their intent. And the idea is that the moment of orgasm, whether male or female, represents creative or procreative energy that comes out of you, and you essentially blow your load or squirt your whatever on the sigil, and that will actually empower it through your sexual energy in a similar way that the blood energy will. Or you can do some kind of visualization exercise where you build up a white light in your mind and then pour that white light into the sigil. There's many different ways you can do it, but attention and concentration, blood, pain, and sex, all of them have a certain power to them, and your job is to put as much power as you can into the sigil. Now, blood magic, morally questionable. Sex magic, maybe a little bit less so. If you want to keep it on the right-hand path and the straight and narrow, you might just want to meditate and put your chi and your prana and your mental energy into the sigil. But blood and orgasmic fluids are actually used more often. And I just want to explain that to you, not necessarily because I want you to do that or because I do that. I don't. But because it explains in a formulaic nature how this actually works. You set your intention. you concentrate your intention into a symbolic or metaphorical form, and then you charge that metaphorical or symbolic form with emotional, sexual, or energetic energy. And the energy you put in is the power. The formulation of your intent is the goal or the aiming, the targeting. And if you have both the sufficient targeting so that your energy goes in the right direction, and the sufficient energy so that it goes far enough, your will be achieved. So this is like a very simplified and formulaic form of magic that we're going to build on in future episodes when we go into more of the ceremonial magic. But if you followed what I just said from Austin Osman's Spirit System, you choose a paradigm, a belief system, you formulate your intent, you render your intent into symbolic form, and you charge that symbolic form with psychic, spiritual, sexual, or life energy. And then ultimately your will come to pass, and what you intend will actually be achieved. And again, magic is the art and science of causing change in accordance with the will. So on that point, perhaps I'll hand it back to Drew.
Oh, that was wonderful. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Shogun. Yeah, that encapsulated a lot. I think it showed the importance of not only what our will is supposed to do, but how ritual takes effect in some manner. The act of creating a intent, and then the sigil, and so on, and charging, like that's what all of magic is. And the idea is that it gets more complex, the visuals get more intense, your attention gets more intense, and reality becomes more intense. It slowly builds up and up, and it can be extremely intimidating at first when we get into the later practices. It has been for me on my journey. I know it has, but like when I've gone through it, it ends up being a lot of fun. I like a video game. I don't mean to like diminish its value in any way whatsoever, but it is quite fun once you get into the groove of it all. I have a couple of closing notes. I want to read a paragraph or two from Damien's about what role love plays in magic, because I think it shows what really matters here, and why one would go through this journey in the first place, and what we're all trying to cater to in some sense. But again, I just want to say thank you to Shogun. This has been a privilege. And I know some of the stuff here may sound mundane, it may sound basic, it may sound like maybe a little bit of a waste of your time, but I promise you, if you just pay a little bit more attention, take more notes to what you pay attention to, and put spins on it, and then try to play with your imagination more. Get in touch with your inner child and remember what it was like to be a kid, and to imagine, entire worlds in your head, because it had so much power. It impacted your childhood. Some of our happiest memories are within our imagination, and that's powerful, and remembrance. And it is reflecting into what we've become today. I guarantee a lot of our imaginations, we may not live up to them fully, of course, but in some moral value, we try to live up to what we imagined when we were children. And so the same aspect plays a role in this. And so we need to take into account how much the mundane and simple things really mean when you take back control of them. But I'm going to give a closing statement, and that's from Damien Eccles, because I really want to pay tribute to this person in particular, because he kind of gave a very simple understanding. His story demonstrates how it benefited him, and it's just a wonderful example of what ceremonial magic can be for somebody. And he walks you through how to do it, just about all of it, in a very simple way, and it's not cryptic or anything like that. You pick up a Golden Dawn book or something, and you might lose your mind trying to figure out what half of it even means. With it was different world back then, but nonetheless, I'm gonna pay tribute to Damien here. I'm gonna read this real quick. Someone recently asked me what role love plays in magic. For me, magic is love. Whenever you bring in divine light to manifest one thing or the other in the world, what you're actually doing is pulling in love. This is why magic is never a dark or scary thing, because the very act of practicing magic brings you into harmony with the divine, no matter what name you call it. When you practice magic in this way, you become a better person, and that makes the world a better place. Helping other beings is what love looks like in action. And practicing magic in a way that brings more divine energy into your life means that you help everyone you touch. When you send a thought form to someone, say someone close to you who needs healing of some sort, where you're actually sending them is love in the form of divine light. And the reason you do so is to make them whole, to make them happy. What we normally think of as love actually is nothing more than attachment. In the core of our being, we know that true love is unconditional. True love doesn't waver or disappear if our loved one screws up or goes off all thrills. Going forward, it's important that you distinguish attachment from love. The foundation of magic is all about living in harmony with love, manifesting love, and applying that love in the world. In this way, we become co-partners with magic in the ongoing act of creation. And I want to say further that I think what this really entails is how much we don't love ourselves and we don't love the world without attachment. And that through our will, if we're more loving with the will we have in the world, we're going to be the change we wish to see in the world eventually. And ceremonial magic is definitely the thing that's done it for me. And I'd like to back up to where Shogun was in the beginning in explaining that the many different paths one takes in life does not distinguish how they succeed morally, but that if it's through love and through righteousness, we all succeed in the end. And it's a beautiful thing. And that's it for today, honestly. I think that does it. Shogun, would you like to introduce the floor for questions or share any final thoughts you have?
Yeah, thank you so much, Drew. That was fantastic. I really appreciate your information, your perspective. Couldn't agree more. But I do think it's fair that we at least open it up if anyone does have a question, something that wasn't clear or something they wanted to get clarification on. Now's your chance. Does anyone have a question? That's fine. If there are no questions,
maybe not so much like a question, but like concern, like how everyone is connected and stuff, and like maybe at some point like putting something, maybe like just a suggestion, maybe something like understanding, connection, and like something like that. I don't know. It's not very clear, but it's like I don't know. Yeah, that's like just understanding the connection we have with each other and stuff like that. I don't know if that's like specific enough.
I mean, what I'll say about that is all of us here came together in this room. There's 20 people, 22 people in this chat. That's 22 people out of 8 billion people on the world, on the planet Earth, who, for whatever reason, were in this particular chat to hear this particular presentation and to think about these particular issues. So I would say from a magical point of view, there's a reason for that. Nothing happens for an accident. So if you happen to listen to this, maybe there's a reason you're one of only 20 people out of 8 billion who heard this particular podcast live. Maybe there was a message for you. Maybe there's a reason why you heard it. That's my response to what you said. But what I want to say is we're going to continue this. This was an introduction. Hopefully it gave you some understanding of why you should take this seriously, how it works, what it means, and how it actually is practiced. You want to start by reframing your thoughts to be positive. You want to focus your intention and your will. You want to have belief that you can achieve your goals. You want to have faith that you can do so. And then you want to achieve those goals. And that ultimately is what magic is, the art and science of causing change in accordance with the will. And we've tried to introduce you to that now. And we're going to continue this series probably into ultimately a 12-part series, which will be 4 series of 3. But that being said, this will be recorded. It'll be uploaded on YouTube and eventually BitChute and SoundCloud, so you guys can re-listen to it. And also there's a whole series of past events that we've done on these topics, which will give you a lot more grounding and background and basis. But I'm very, very happy with what we got out here. So thank you so much, Drew. Really appreciate it. Great stuff. And thank you to the audience for attending live. As always, join the Roundtable Discord server we record these events every day at 9. We'll do another one tomorrow, and check out announcements for upcoming events on RT Podcast for past events. As for now, let's jump up to round table or the pub and continue, or video chat, and continue to hang out for the rest of the night. Thank you so much.